silent H. So the Swayambara of Drupadi. So having heard of that they were doing the Swayambara and Arjuna being, everyone was intrigued, but Arjuna was intrigued at the prospect of, because they needed an ally. I mean, it's important because obviously the Dhritarashtra and the Kurus kind of ditched him on the street. So they need to have a royal ally. And Drupada already kind of doesn't like Dhritarashtra. And plus, he wanted to openly make them allies. So they were like, well, let's go over there. So the Pandavas headed, and they, as often happens, they showed up, but there's nowhere to stay. So Drupada made a lot of arrangements for kings and other people, but the Pandavas really didn't have any place to stay. So they found a potter's house, and they asked if they could stay with him, and he had a guest room, and so they stayed. They stayed with the potter, but the whole city was packed because there was so many kings and all their servants. So it was, the whole place was just totally packed with so many, kings, and he built marble palaces to house all the different kings that came to visit, and they built this huge like amphitheater, like the Colosseum. It was open air, and for 30 days they waited. Every day there would be wrestlers and jugglers and musicians and different people to entertain the crowd. Because it isn't like everyone can just show up. It's a big country, it's a big world, and so they waited a month so that all the people could show up and get ready. So after at the appointed time, they the crowd, everyone's sitting and talking, and it's kind of, there's a buzz in the crowd, and so they brought out some musical instruments, and they played flute and drum and played some nice soft melodies, and everyone kind of got quiet and paid attention to the music. And so then Drishtajumna walked out. And so they had a thing set up. There was a bow, some arrows, and there was a pool of water. And above that, there was a spinning wheel. And there was a metallic fish on the spinning wheel. And he had to shoot. So Drishtajumna said, whoever can string this bow and hit the eye of the fish, they win. And they get to marry the princess. Yeah, they have to look in the reflection. They have to look in the reflection and then shoot up into the eye of the fish. First, they have to string the bow, right? So, anyway, so then he said, then they get to marry the princess. So then, drum roll, and Princess Draupadi walks out holding a golden plate with a rose flower garland. So she was so beautiful that there was one king there named Bhagidat. This is different than another Bhagidat that was the Pandavas fight with later. This guy was so old. His like great grandchildren were gonna compete, and he just kind of came there to watch. He's so old that in order to keep his eyes from drooping down, and because he tied his eyelashes to his eyebrows with bowstring. That's how old he was, to keep his wrinkly face from compacting on itself. So that's how old he was. And when Draupadi stepped out, he picked up his bow and went down into the arena. Because she's that beautiful. The passion, he ran down there. Everyone, all the Kshatriyas started getting agitated, slapping their arms, and like saying, "Oh, you're a loser, I will win." And then the other person, "No, you're weak, I will win." And they started like getting agitated and putting each other down and boasting, and so a lot of different people came up. So they had this bow. So a lot of people came up, they couldn't even lift the bow. Because you have to be, Arjuna is very strong. Couldn't even lift the bow. A lot of the kings that couldn't even lift the bow. Others, they could lift the bow and they would bend the bow, right? And some, none of them could string it. Duryodhan came up and he got as close as a grain of barley. But then he couldn't make it go down anymore. Shalya came up. He was the king of Madra. He was very strong. He came up. He got it as close as a grain of rice. Jarasandha came. He got as close as a sesame seed, but he couldn't. And Karna came up. And a lot of people say, oh no, Karna couldn't. Draupadi said Karna. No, that wasn't. The rule was anybody that can string the bow, they can shoot. And later on, Arjuna is going to come up and say, can I shoot? And so Arjuna says, anyone, it doesn't matter if he's a Sudra, if he's or a Brahmin or any other caste, the qualification is that you can string the bow. So this whole story of Draupadi saying no is a lie. And this is Madhvacharya. He says Karna got up and he tried to string it. He got as close as a mustard seed, but he couldn't string. So none of the kings could string the bow. And Krishna and Balaram were there. And Krishna he saw the Pandavas. He told Balaram, oh, that's the Pandavas. He said, I'm so glad to see that they weren't killed. So Krishna made it so none of the Yadava heroes got to participate, to interfere. Because obviously, Krishna and Balaram, he could win, right? So, finally, none of the kings could come up, and everyone was like kind of looking in shock. So finally, Arjuna gets up and starts to walk down. And he's, dressed as a Brahmin. He has a black deer skin wrapped over his shoulder, dreaded knots in the hair. He says, can I shoot? So Arjuna says, anyone, whatever Varna, they can shoot, as long as you can string the bow. So he goes to walk. And some of the younger ones, the neophyte, the Brahmins, they say, no, he'll insult us. But then there's the ones that have the true vision. The rishis, And of course, he's the Amsha of Indra. So he has a lot of power. So they could tell, oh, this person, they said he's very powerful. The senior ones. They said he's very powerful. Let him go. So Arjuna comes forward and he strings the bow. And everyone's amazed, is shocked. No one can even talk. They would have been screaming, but it's just so shocking. Then he, in the blink of an eye, he puts the arrow on the bow, pulls it back, looks in the pool, shoots the fish target right in the eye. And then everyone's drums beating, horns blowing, conch shells blowing. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention that the whole sky is filled with demigods because they wanted to see what was going to happen because it was that big of a deal, So then they're showering flowers down from the heavens, and the audience is showering flowers, and all the Brahmins stand up and start waving their deer skins in the air and banging their dandas on the ground, making commotion, and all the Kshatriyas are angry, and Draupadi steps forward shyly and puts the rose petal garland around Arjuna's neck. And so all the Kshatriyas, they stand up in unison and step forward, and they say, we've been insulted. This upstart young boy has ruined our Kshatriya prowess. And besides, this is an unfit wedding. He said, what is poor Brahmin going to take care of a princess? He cannot give her anything that she wants. This is an outrage. Can he give her nice clothes? Can he give her jewelry? Can he give her maidservants? Can he give her enjoyment? This is a wretched combination. He said, we should kill this boy and kill Drupada to make sure that no other Swayambara gets so messed up. So they start talking like this, and there's some nasty fellows there, Shakuni and Duryodhan and Karna and Jarasandha, and they all start talking in this way. All the Kshatriyas kind of get like fired up, and they step forward in unison. So when Bhima sees this, he sneaks off. And then Arjuna tells Draupadi, you go with my brothers. So there's Yudhisthira, Nakula, and Sahadev, and they kind of guard her and kind of head off with her. And Arjuna stands to face the Kshatriyas with the bow that he used and some arrows in hand. And then Drupada sees what's going on, so he has the armory. They bring Arjuna cartloads of arrows. So then Karna steps forward. And then they start shooting bows and arrows at each other, Arjuna and Karna. And then, all the other Kshatriyas come forward. And then they see this big shadow descend over the arena. And they wonder what's going on. And the sun's blocked out. And then all of a sudden it gets smaller and smaller. And then Bhima lands with a big kaboom in the middle of the arena. And he's got this huge tree over his shoulder. And what he had done is he actually jumped all the way to Burloka. And there's where they got these trees that are so massive. They're like miles and miles tall. And there's this huge tree or this huge branch, and he kicked it off. And then he put it on his shoulder and he jumped back. And so he had it, this big, huge branch, big as like a tree. And he knocked off with his hand all the branches. So he had like a big club in his hand. And all the Kshatriyas saw this, and they were scared. But the Shalya stepped forward. He actually is their uncle. Bhima came and he swung the club, the tree. And dust cleared and Shalya's just standing there. Broken tree, and Shalya wasn't broken. he was really strong. So Shalya and Bhima, they started to wrestle. And so Karna and Arjuna are fighting. So the Kshatriyas, all of a sudden, all the Brahmins come down from the bench, from the auditorium. And they have their dandas and their deer skins, and they start taunting the Kshatriyas. We'll stand by our man. So the Kshatriyas start fighting with the Brahmins. But they don't really want to hurt them. So it's more like play fighting. But anyway, it's a lot more intense with Karna and Arjuna. And they're shooting arrows. Arrows are whizzing. And like going so fast that the friction from the air is causing them to catch on fire. And, they're shooting each other's arrows out of the sky. And there's giant piles of broken arrows littering the Colosseum. And finally, Karna, all the Kshatriyas are watching, who are these guys? Like, there's this guy, he did this impossible task. And he's like holding it up against Karna, who's a great hero. And then there's this other giant hero, Brahmin guy who showed up with this monster-sized branch and started bashing people around with it. So who are these guys? The Kshatriyas started thinking maybe they're like demigods that came to claim the woman and they took human form. And so Karna was fighting with him, and he's like, are you the science of arms personified, or some Indra? No one else could stand in front of me. And then all of a sudden, Arjuna's about to say something, and then Krishna gets in between. And he says, look. He said, obviously these people have proven their prowess. And besides, a Brahmin is a higher birth than a Kshatriya. So we should give them all blessings and stop this fighting. So then everything was stopped. Just like how the full moon brings the cool light. Krishna came and calmed down all the Kshatriyas. So they kind of, chilled out. And then Arjuna caught up with the brothers. And they went to the potter's house. Now, Kunti was inside. And Arjuna was coming to the door. And he called out to his mother. He said, "Dear mother, we have special dakshin." Because by that he meant Draupadi. Because they would go out and they would go and collect dakshin food so she could cook. So he said, I've collected very special dakshin today. And so the mother, she was busy cooking with her back to the door. She didn't see. She said, make sure, if it's so special, make sure you share with all your brothers. So this is where we get the whole concept. And so she looked around and she saw he's holding Draupadi. And so Draupadi's shocked and Kunti's shocked and all the Yudhishthira's looking at all his brothers, and Kunti said, I can never say an untruth. So there's a couple stories. They all kind of understood that it's what should happen. And there's a couple stories of why it happened. There's an earlier one. There's a early one. Then there's another one, and then so I'll explain. The first way that it started out is that some goddesses, they were a little devious, and Brahma, his first word was tapa, so he likes to do austerity. So these goddesses thought, if we combine all of our forces together, then we'll be able to distract him, right? So they did that. And so they tried to allure Brahma. And the only thing he did was curse them. That they would maintain all their form together, but they would have 5 husbands, and they would be still married to all their 5 husbands. So then that same form was reborn as this woman. And she did austerity to Shiva to get a husband. And she said, Mahadev came and he said, what is the benediction you want? She said, I want a husband. And he didn't act like he heard her. He didn't say anything. So she said again, I want a husband. I want a husband. I want a husband. I want a husband. Then Mahadev said, you shall get 5 husbands. Now, there's another version of that story that I heard, which is that she said, I want a husband who's strong. I want a husband who's a great fighter. I want a husband who's wise. I want a husband who's beautiful. I want a husband who's adherent to Dharma. She wanted all those things. So Mahadev said, well, all those things you can't find in one man, so you have to marry 5. As another version of the way that it was said. But that's basically how it all came to be. So actually, Drishtadyumna, he wondered who these people were himself. So he followed them. And he took them, he followed the Pandavas, and he came to the window. Because he wanted to know, what's going on. So he's kind of watching, and the Pandavas were lying there, and they were like talking like Kshatriyas, which was defined as they were talking about the battle. Oh, you did a good job. They were talking like warriors. They weren't talking like Brahmins. That was a good move you did. And like they were, Bhima and Arjuna and all the Pandavas were talking about the fighting. And then he saw that Krishna and Balaram came. And they started talking to everybody, and Krishna embraced Kunti. And so Drishtadyumna was like watching, I wonder who these people are. So then he came back, and so he told his father, he said, they talk like Kshatriyas, they live in the house of a Vaishya, and but they dress as Brahmins. I don't know who they are. So Drupada said, we'll invite them to the palace. So he invited, the next day a chariot came and took them, the Pandavas and Draupadi and Kunti, to the palace. So then Drupada, in order to tell, he put 3 tables. And this is an interesting scenario because I often wonder which table I would go to. But it's kind of like all 3, to tell you the truth. So he had 3 tables there. One table had agricultural implements and seeds and different things like that. Another one had weapons and armor. And another one had all the paraphernalia for doing the Agnihotra. So he put those out there because he wanted to see that naturally inclined to go to one place because of their nature. The way he could tell what the Varna was. So they immediately went to the weapons. And they pulled them off, and they're looking at them and doing stuff with them. And he said, they're Kshatriyas. So he came forward, he said, who are you? So they said, actually, we're the Pandavas. We're the sons of Pandu. And so Drupada was very happy. He said, this is my wish, so you will marry Arjuna. And Yudhishthira said, no, I'm the oldest brother, so she'll marry me first. And then Bhima, and then Arjuna, and then Nakula, and then Sahadev. And then, like, Drupada's jaw dropped. No, I mean, I've heard of polygamy, but polyandry is where it's one woman with many men. He said polyandry is very rare. And they talked to him, and they tried to convince him that they felt it was right, so they should do it, and that wasn't really working. So Vyasa showed up, and he took him to a side, and he explained those stories about her origin and why everything happened. And he actually looked, and he saw like the divine forms of all the Pandavas, and then he was like, okay. So Draupadi married Yudhishthira, and then Bhima, and Arjuna, and then Nakula, and then Sahadev. And Krishna gave them a lot of presents. In the Yadus, his birth, not marriage presents. All kinds of gold and chariots and all kinds of stuff to like kind of help him set up a kingdom. So that's the Swayambara of Drupadi.